Alright, so straight off the bat, space junk's a pretty huge problem, and we're underestimating because it's only getting bigger and bigger. Plus, we've got climate change, plastic pollution, and whatnot. But space junk? That's a whole new ballgame. In fact, at this point, we should be asking ourselves, will it be common for space junk to be falling on our houses in the future? First off, let's talk about where it all started from. So we're going to rewind back to 2009. Imagine this. 500 miles above Siberia, two satellites collided at an incredible speed of 22,300 miles an hour, only to burst into a huge cloud of thousands of pieces of debris. And who's to blame for this high-speed accident? The inactive Russian satellite Cosmos 2251 and the active US-based communications satellite called Iridium 33. Now, the catastrophic end was actually the first time, at least the one we know of, that two satellites actually collided in space. Honestly, it's nothing less than a startling reminder of the growing problem of space junk that we continue to ignore. Now, over 23,000 known man-made fragments, larger than 4 inches, zip around our planet. Now, if you need to imagine the scale, just think about somewhere a little wider than 2 golf balls across. But here's the thing. These pieces are just large enough for us to track them. So if we're talking about the ones we can't even track, researchers believe that we've got over 500,000 pieces between 0.4 inches and 4 inches that actually join the larger fragments we're talking about. And a lot of this debris actually sits right within the 1,250 miles of Earth's surface, which is basically low Earth orbit. It's also home to a bunch of satellites, including NASA's Earth Observing System fleet and the International Space Station. Now, we know that space is absolutely huge, so clearly, even these 23,000 fragments are probably going to be far from each other, right? Having said that, even the tiniest bits of man-made flotsam can become a huge problem for active Earth orbiters because of their breakneck speeds. Now, space junk can actually go on to impact other objects at over 22,300 miles per hour, and that's faster than a speeding bullet. So collisions with these tiny pieces are pretty much going to leave pits and dings in a bunch of satellites, telescopes, and whatever else is orbiting our planet. Like in 2006, for example, a tiny piece of space junk somehow collided with the International Space Station and ended up taking a chip out of the heavily reinforced window. With that said, what is all this trash? Alright, so space junk's been a huge part of the problem since the first human man-made satellite, Sputnik 1, somehow escaped Earth's gravitational pull back on October 4th, 1957. The momentous event hinted at the start of the space age as humans began to explore even further away from Earth. And that feat's been repeated in over 4,700 launches around the world. But that also means that we've left our mark on space, but in the form of trash. A lot of this junk also includes a bunch of stuff, including the smaller bits and pieces that were lost to space, like paint chips flaking away, nuts and bolts, some garbage caps, screwdrivers, or even a spatula. With that said, the number increased pretty sharply in the last few years, thanks to both the 2009 satellite collision and China's 2007 destruction of the Fengyan 1C weather satellite during an anti-missile test. In fact, back on March 27, 2019, India announced that it successfully completed an anti-satellite missile test, which in turn created a new cloud of at least 400 pieces of debris, and that increased the risk of impacts to the ISS by a whopping 44% just over a 10-day period. Now here's the scary piece. Parts of a 23-ton piece of the rocket will come crashing down somewhere soon. Alright, so over the course of the next few days, be prepared for a 23-ton piece of the rocket to plummet to Earth at the speed of 15,000 miles an hour. A lot of it will probably burn up on re-entry, but a bunch of it won't. So where will that piece go? Well, it could land as one secure piece or a bunch of pieces scattered over an area up to hundreds of miles across. Now, scientists narrowed down the likely impact zone to within the latitudes of 41 degrees north and 41 degrees south. Worried about where you are right now? Well, basically, they've narrowed it down to a region that's covering a huge chunk of the US and South America, Africa, and the Middle East, most of Asia, and even all of Australia, excluding the island of Tasmania. And here's the scary part. Beyond that, predictions are pretty iffy. Here's what Dr. Jonathan McDowell, astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, had to say. It seems like just a few hours after it finally re-enters the atmosphere, we're going to know where it actually was. And here's the thing. It's traveling at 17,000 miles an hour. So if you're an hour out, you're 17,000 miles out. Now, scientists do believe that it's really unlikely that it'll cause any damage or loss of life. But is that enough? In fact, space watchers might not be too concerned, but they're not too happy about the situation either. Moving on. What if a rocket landed on your house? Hold up. Don't start hyperventilating just yet. Alright, so just last year, a piece of space junk fell from a Chinese rocket and plummeted uncontrolled back to Earth and landed directly in the Indian Ocean near the Maldives. And 2 years ago, another Chinese rocket was also pretty out of control and landed directly into the waters off the West African coast. Now, no one knew where it came from. No one knew when either of these pieces of space junk was going to hit. So it's definitely a relief that no one got hurt. So imagine that instead of landing in the ocean or something, the Chinese rocket actually crashed into your house. What's going to happen? Well, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty and 1972 Liability Convention, both of which are adopted by the United Nations, say that this is probably going to be a government-to-government issue. Ouch! Now, the treaties say that the states are internationally responsible and liable for any damage whatsoever caused by a spacecraft. And yes, that's even if a private company from that state was responsible for the damage. So basically, if a piece of junk landed on your house, your country's government is going to make a claim for your compensation through diplomatic channels and then pay you for the damages. But that's if they choose to make a claim at all in the first place. Also, the chances of a broken satellite landing on your house are pretty slim, but that doesn't mean it never happened. In fact, back in 1978, the Soviet Cosmos 954 satellite fell into a barren region of Canada's Northwest Territories, and when it crashed, it literally spread massive radioactive debris from its onboard nuclear reactor all over the land. So just a heads up, space debris has definitely crashed onto land before, but again, chances are pretty slim, so don't be too scared. Next, the biggest problem is actually space pollution. Honestly, risks to life and property shouldn't be the only concerns we've got about a busy sky. While satellite operators, launch providers, and insurance companies definitely care about the issue of space debris, mostly because of its impact on space operations, we've also got to think about space sustainability. Yep, the environment of space has got some value itself, and right now it faces an even greater risk of harm than individuals on Earth. On a broader spectrum, we've got to understand that degrading the environment on Earth through pollution or some sort of mismanagement is pretty awful because of its horrible impact on the environment and everyone living on the planet. And well, the same thing is also true for space, even if we don't see a clear victim or some sort of physical harm. So what do we need to do? Talking about governments, in the Cosmos 954 settlement, the Canadians said that since the Soviet satellite deposited pretty dangerous radioactive debris in Canada's territory, it's going to come under damage to property within the limits of the Liability Convention. But at the same time, Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty says that no state can actually own outer space or celestial bodies. So it's pretty unclear whether this interpretation would apply when objects are harmed in space. Anyway, a good place for governments to start would be removing from orbit existing larger objects that could collide with each other. With that said, if the United Nations or the governments agreed on laws that clearly specify legal consequences for creating space debris in the first place and follow it up with a punishment, that could really help. In fact, it could really help reduce the risk of future pollution of the space environment. But before you leave, let us tell you that the chances of a falling satellite killing you are close to zero. And even if it does happen, somewhere in an alternate universe, we've got some space laws right now with a pretty good framework that'll help when dealing with such a rare event. And that's a wrap for this video. What's your take on space pollution? Do you think it's going to be raining space junk anytime soon? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.